And slides and a recording link will be emailed to all after the meeting. Thank you to whoever that was on my team who started the recording. Okay, that would have been very disappointing. Okay, let me tell you a little bit about the Dallas Coalition for Hunger Solutions, who has organized this event today. So, some of you are already familiar. We were organized in 2012, so we're almost 10 years old. Very proud of that. Our mission has been to empower all Dallas County residents to gain equitable access to healthy food. We focus on 5 priority areas: child hunger, senior hunger, faith community engagement, public policy and advocacy, and urban agriculture. And so you are part of our urban agriculture focus this morning. The Urban Agriculture Action Team is composed of organizations and individuals working together to increase opportunities for local, sustainable food production. Our Urban Agriculture Action Team co-chairs are Susie Marshall of Grow North, Texas, and Candace Thompson with the Baylor Scott and White Health and Wellness Center at the Juanita J. Craft Recreation Center. So I'm going to turn it over to Candace Thompson now. I will introduce her. She is the Community Outreach Manager for Baylor Scott and White Health and Wellness Center at the J.J. Craft Recreation Center. She is a community health advocate, a food equity advocate, and she's working to address systemic health and food access inequities. Candace, I'm going to turn it over to you to introduce our special guest this morning.
All right, good morning. Thank you, Lionella, for the warm welcome. And thank you everyone for choosing to spend your Saturday morning with us. I am really excited about having this conversation with my 2 people that I do not only consider classmates, but I consider them to be friends. And so one is the Reverend Wavette Blair Lavallee. She is the senior pastor, First Christian Methodist Evangelistic Church in Dallas. It's over here in our Redbird area. She is definitely a faith-guided advocate for abolishing food insecurity, displacement, and gentrification. But some other passion areas I would also like to highlight for her are dismantling racism and patriarchy. She is a food justice advocate, a social justice advocate. And then we have, my dear sweet fellow nature-loving friend and poetry lover, Mr. Nathan Doris. And with Nathan, he is pursuing his doctorate of ministry. He plays a mean guitar, and so his focus is, he's in Arkansas, in Central Arkansas. He is a music lover, a dog lover. You can see his dog here in the picture. And then he is truly awed by the holy mystery of the world. And in class, he helps us to look at our faith walk in different ways. Before we get started, I did want to share a poem by Khalil Gibran. It is Mother's Day weekend, and we want to make certain that we are highlighting and appreciating all of the mothers and the mothering aspects of our lives. All right, it says, the most beautiful word on the lips of mankind is the word mother. And the most beautiful call is the call of my mother. It is a word full of hope and love, a sweet and kind word coming from the depths of the heart. The mother is everything. She is our consolation in sorrow, our hope in misery, and our strength in weakness. She is the source of love, mercy, sympathy, and forgiveness. Everything in nature bespeaks the mother. The sun is the mother of earth and gives its nourishment of heart. It never leaves the universe at night until it has put the earth to sleep to the song of sea and the hymn of birds and brooks. And this earth is the mother of trees and flowers. It produces them, nurses them, and weans them. The trees and flowers become kind mothers of their great fruits and seeds. And the mother, the prototype of all existence, is the eternal spirit, full of beauty and love. And so I just want to dedicate that to all of you. And that's whether you're a mother, you're an aunt, you're an uncle, you're a father, some of us all mother something, and or or if you're a pet parent or plant parent. And so without further ado, I would like to welcome Reverend Yvette Blair Lavallee and Nathan Doris. Welcome, welcome, welcome. So beyond, these are two individuals that are beyond the words that we're used to express or to give their bios. Reverend Yvette Blair, would you care to add anything else, that you think that our audience should know about you before we get into our good, juicy, earthy conversation?
No, I think what you've shared is sufficient for this morning. Thank you.
All right, most welcome. And Nathan Doris, my friend, I don't know if Seymour is with you, but would you and Seymour have any words to share in addition to the ones that I read for your bio before we get started? All right, good deal. All right, like I said, I don't know what a better way to spend a Saturday morning than to be with two people that I hold dear and I'm grateful for. And so this morning we're going to be talking about land, food, and faith. And so Yvette and Nathan, if you could tell us, when you hear those words of land, food, and faith, which three of those words resonates with you the most and why? And so either one goes first. Go ahead.
Oh, thank you. So I want to say, as I enter into this conversation, it helps me to talk about how I arrived here, and I think that will help to answer which one of those is most prominent for me. So I come as the great, great, great granddaughter of Matilda, and the census records from 1880 show that she came here as a 30-year-old from Mississippi. And she came with her mother and three sons. And something happened once she got here and she ended up being a widow. But she is listed in the census as the head of household in Navarro County and of owning land. And so when I look at that and I think about what it means for a woman, a Black woman, to own land all the way back then in 1880, for me, that becomes the most prominent thing is land. And the reason that's most prominent for me is because land is something that God has given to us,
Mhm.
and God has given it to us to be stewards of the land. I think a lot of times we focus so much on ownership of land and we don't really focus in on what it means to be good stewards of the land. And so, along with the responsibility of what that means to be inclusive of nature in its entirety, creation in its entirety. So, for me, although you would think faith would be most prominent, just because of ministry, but for me, it's land.
Okay, thank you. All right, Mr. Nathan Doris, what say you?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think probably I'm gonna go with land also, because that's the source of the other two things. I think the food comes from the land, and often faith also does. People have, since as far as I know, been finding strength and metaphor and beauty and conviction and courage and all kinds of things from their relationship with the natural world, human and non-human, largely non-human. The Bible is full of agrarian metaphor and imagery. Jesus is telling parables about seeds all the time. Indigenous and traditional societies are living in close relationship with the land and learning how to be human from observing the way that other creatures are themselves. And so I think land is the foundation, the bedrock, the soil from which all of the rest of it grows.
Thank you. And so Reverend Yvette, answered my next question with that first question, and then maybe had I been a little smarter and knowing who I was dealing with, I would have said it the other way around. But so Nathan, for you, so where do you enter into this sacred space, the sacred dance between land, food, and faith?
Well, I enter into it in central Arkansas, in the Arkansas River Valley, in the Little Red River watershed. attention to ecology and the cycles of nature has been sort of like an increasingly important theme in my own life. I have a history of doing some social justice work and advocacy, Catholic workers, and through that work began to realize the interconnections of different kinds of injustices that we are facing in our society and our world. And all of that has really been intimately tied up with my understanding of the Christian tradition. And so raised Christian, and then I ended up having to sort of unlearn and relearn, deconstruct and reconstruct a lot of the contours of that. And as became increasingly apparent, that was one of the stories that was important for me understanding who I am. But another story that's really important is the story of nature, the story of the seasons and the cycles, and our ability to live well with our neighbors and fellow creatures. So I think I don't understand my faith outside of trying to understand the world around me anymore. They're intimately bound together for me.
That is beautiful, beautiful, beautiful. So our cohort in class, and I guess as the announcement should be made, we are all classmates in a program at Memphis Theological Seminary, and our focus is on land, food, and faith. We're all doctoral students, and so why would you say that that food and faith even matter? So why and where does faith play a role in our food systems, that are active and have a interesting place in our current, and I would say also historical histories here in the United States. Reverend Watt?
I think, yeah, that's a really great question, Candace. And I think from a faith perspective, when we think about food, I don't know that we can't not think about food and faith and how they go together. And what I mean by that is within the Christian tradition, which I'm a part of, I think about the Eucharist. And so I think about, Holy Communion, the Lord's Supper. I think about what it means to come to the table and to break bread together and to drink grape juice or wine together. I think about a lot of the stories that we read about Jesus was always having a meal. And so meals were very, very important. And as Nathan shared, the Bible is this agrarian culture. And so to me, you can't separate the two. They go hand in hand when you talk about food and faith. And so I think it's especially important for the faith community to be involved in what happens in our foodways, in our systems, to understand who are the persons that are being neglected, who are the persons that are being made marginalized, who are the persons who are being made oppressed and that don't have access to food. I think about what it says in Genesis 1, that God has given us every fruit-bearing tree in order for us to be able to have food. And that means all of us. It's not selective. It's not one group gets to have it versus another group gets to have it. And so I think that becomes a responsibility for the faith community to really investigate and interrogate within their own community, who are the persons who don't have access, who are the persons who are left out, if you will, and then to be able to look at that through the lens of your faith and to say, if I have access to food and God has provided for me, then why isn't it that my neighbor doesn't have access to food? And what can I do through a theological lens to ensure that that person has food too?
And warning, ladies and gentlemen, and preachers watching this, you may get a couple of amens. So amen to all of that, Reverend White. Amen to all of that. And Nathan, how about yourself?
When I think about the word faith, faith is like is kind of a tricky thing to define. People use it in a lot of a lot of kind of different ways. I
Yes.
think largely refers to a religious faith, and that's, you know, the context that we're talking about. I think in its broadest sense, it has to do with a sense of hope and possibility. What do we believe can be true or can be in this world? And people are often deeply impacted by their own religious tradition in terms of being able to envision what is possible. And so when we look at our food system, when we look at equitable distribution, inequitable distribution of food and resources and land, and the history, the implication, or the history that has all kinds of injustices woven into it. The question is like, what could be? Here is what is, and we can understand these things in myriad ways. But what could be? And in America, in the United States of America, Christianity plays an enormous role in shaping our understanding of the world, for better or worse. It just is what it is. Many people profess Christianity, and so the role of churches and theologians in framing our understanding of what is possible, what could be, like Yvette was saying, what is in the creation narrative, what is in the story that we have about the creation of the world, the good earth, that enables us to envision an equitable distribution of the mystery that is food. And churches have a huge role to play in that. Often churches have lots of land, and they have big kitchens, and they're social hubs, and sometimes use those things for good and sometimes don't. And so how can churches marshal their resources in order to bring about this thing that they have faith in, a faith that comes from, you know, the words of scripture, the life of Jesus, who was, you know, breaking bread and redistributing it through his own mysteries. And then I think also just to sort of, food itself is this kind of holy mystery, this thing that is outside of our control, that is given to us out of abundance and goodness. And faith, the life of faith, ideally teaches us how to receive those gifts and to pass them along in our own lives.
Definitely. And so for each of you, you know, I would say, you know, I'm wondering, like, so this walk and you know, this walk of faith, this walk of, you know, land, food, and faith. You know, so what was it, or you know, or what is it that keeps you at this communion table, if you want to say, you know, of one taking it, you know, taking it from just being in your heart, in your life, and in your own personal area of influence, and moving beyond that, to engage others, you know, in this, you know, so was it, you know, so what kind of influence, you know, would you say that you have had that has brought you to where you are right now? Be it, you know, was it working at the Catholic Worker House? You know, was it, you know, hanging, you know, with mom, or growing food, you know, on whatever plot of land that you had, you know, or was it cooking? And, you know, are they, you know, the food memories that we have when we eat certain things? But what was it, you know, or what is it? Because it can still be, you know, very much so present with you right now, that brings you to the table. You know, it's kind of like a stone soup. What is it that, you know, that you bring to the table with you when you enter these spaces? And I know, why you mentioned I think it's your great, maybe another great grandmother, Matilda, but in between that lineage into where you are right now, what was it that, you know, that holds you here in this space?
So there are three things that come to mind for me that center this for me, and that helps me to move beyond myself and to look at who are the other people that need to be at this table. I grew up in Dallas, grew up in Oak Cliff, and I remember every Saturday morning, our routine was to go to the Dallas Farmers Market. That was what my mother, my sister, and I did. That was just, we knew every Saturday we were going to do that. We also knew that there was a man from East Texas. He was a farmer, and he would be camped out on Ledbetter with his pickup truck,
Yes.
right?
Yes.
And he would have the watermelons, he would have
Yes.
cantaloupes, and we would always look forward to seeing him
Uh-huh.
every Saturday. And so that's how I grew up. I grew up knowing that food was something that was invitational. That
Mm,
food
mm.
was, yeah, that food was a
Yes,
way
yes.
of bringing people together. It built relationships. And because we always went to the Dallas Farmers Market, we got to know the farmers personally. They knew us by name. And over the years, when that landscape has transitioned and changed, it made me wonder what happened to those farmers. It also made
Yeah.
me wonder what happened to that access that we used to have, and what does that mean for people who no longer have that access? That's one. Secondly, on my mother's side, my family in East Texas, my grandparents own land, and they actually allowed for a church to be built on that land some years
Mm-hmm.
ago. So even for me, there was this formation that I didn't even recognize all the way from a little kid, that the church and the land and food, we also had a
Yes.
cafe
Come
that
on.
was on this land. So you had the house, you had the church, you had the cafe, and it was always a place where people from the community were able to come together. There was food, there was faith, there was fellowship. And then the third thing I want to say is, in my own neighborhood here, I live in the same neighborhood where I pastor at First Christian Methodist Church here in the Redbird area. And I remember in 2019 when the last big box retailer closed. And that meant that access to a full scale grocery store was no longer something that we had in this area, because we have a smaller store, and then we have a Target, of course, which is not a super Target. It's one of the smaller Targets. But even in that sense of looking at that, that became very pressing for me, of the sense of what happens when an area becomes food insecure, what happens to the people in that neighborhood, and what are the ways in which the church should be able to respond, and how can we become advocates, and how can we push for being able to have the same amenities, if you will, that are true and plentiful on the north side of town. So that really became the push for me. And so this program that we are in at Memphis Theological Seminary, this doctoral program, helps me to have some practical application, to be able to come back and to share with colleagues and others in the area, to say these are some ways that we can come together literally at the table and
Yes,
bring
yes.
the persons who are displaced, bring them to the table, so that their voices can be heard and can be a part of it. Oftentimes, we come into something with ideas and solutions of what we think it should be, and we often leave out the people who are impacted. And
Yes.
so for me, it's about bringing them in to the table and letting their voices be centered in all of this.
Excellent. Amen. Are y'all taking up collection after this? I'm just wondering. Yeah.
I can't help it. I always end up preaching. I'm sorry.
Yeah, no, but for me, it's just, like I said, just to be able to have this space in this conversation. So I'm really grateful to my team for allowing us to be able to be here today. Mr. Nathan, you have anything to add to that?
So the question was, what keeps me in this conversation? What keeps me in
Yes.
the conversation between land, food, and faith? So, oh my goodness, so many things. My relationship with my faith tradition is so complicated. I really resonate with the words of Wendell Berry. He talks about Christianity as being the place where he's from. And I feel that way. Christianity is the story that I was raised in, the way that I was taught to see the world. And as I've grown older, I've realized that there are things about that story that are difficult, and
Yeah.
the way that it's played out. Just like we learn that the history of our places is fraught and haunted, and also beautiful. And so I've had to work out my faith with fear and trembling, as St. Paul says, but also with a considerable amount of rage and frustration. And that ultimately led me to go, to Atlanta, Georgia for 2 years and work with the Catholic worker community, doing some pretty intensive, like, practical theology and social advocacy with people experiencing houselessness, and white supremacy, and through like, and the prison system. So through really delving into those particular problems in the city of Atlanta and seeing how they have, where their roots lie, and how American Christianity has perpetuated and also resisted those things. I inevitably kind of took a step back and realized that these were things that had gone all the way back, through our history and the history of this faith in this land. And I had friends who were doing similar kinds of work, but with the land, in Virginia. So decided to go spend a year with them. And I feel a sense of responsibility to the stories that I was given, without my consent. The stories that I was born into, they are a gift and curse both. And I haven't felt right about just leaving them, because I don't know how to understand myself apart from them, and so have stayed, and worked those things out of a sense of responsibility and affection. I love stories, and I love interpreting stories, and I love folk stories, and so it's just my life is a lot more fun. This conversation, and enjoyment is an important part of life. And then, of course, I mean, food. I stay in the conversation because I like to eat and be around people who also love to think a lot about food and feed me really good food while they're doing it. So that's a perk.
Oh man, yes.
I
Indeed.
remember how you fed us, what was it, 2019, when we were in the immersion trip, down in Georgia.
Oh goodness, yes. So in the instance of time, one, I think this conversation could go on definitely for at least a good 2 hours. And if we were all sitting around having tea and everything, it would go on even longer, and then have Nathan play us some tunes. But so this is going to be my last question. And so being that that we are students, learning how to be, I wouldn't necessarily say experts, but experts of our experience, and to share that experience. How are you choosing to respond to the call, of this work by, and meeting at the intersections of land, food, and faith? How are you choosing to come into that space from where you are?
So the way that I'm choosing to respond to the intersection of land, food, and faith, I serve as senior pastor at First Christian Methodist Evangelistic Church, here in Dallas, and we have 6.3 acres of land. Part of that land is dedicated to the Mustard Seed Community Garden. And I just want to say how grateful I am for the Dallas Coalition, because through this coalition, I have formed a partnership with Ples Montgomery with the Oak Cliff Veggie Project. And he and his team have come over to help us to relaunch our Mustard Seed Community Garden. And so for me, it's taking land, it's being good stewards of that land, it is sharing it with the community, and being able to have a space and place for people to come, put their hands in the dirt. To me, that, and in the soil, to me, that's a form of ministry. It also is to help them to be able to plant. And when you come together and plant, and you can have a harvest and abundance for the community, to me, that says something about how you can involve people, and how you can begin to dismantle food insecurity, displacement, and gentrification, primarily of Black, Brown, and Indigenous peoples. So that's the work that I am called to in this season, along with being an advocate for this, and looking at ways that we can have faith-based policies that ensure that all neighborhoods have access to food. So through the project that I'm actually doing for our doctoral program is We Need Bread, KNEAD, and it's really coming up with faith-based responses to how we can change policy to ensure that there are no such things as food deserts anymore.
All right, good. Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah, so many ways. My project, I recently relocated myself to Central Arkansas. I was in undergraduate school here, and my project is really focused on trying to integrate as holistically as possible a place-based ecological knowledge and history, and the Christian story. And so really looking at creating a season of practice and reflection that weaves together the complicated histories of this place and its creatures and the Christian story. And so one of the more exciting things that I've been working with this past year is since I believe that industrial and post-industrial ways of being in the world that are very separated from the land are a little bit spiritually impoverished. We're missing something. Our connection to the land is missing, and so there's a component of us that is needing something that it's not getting. And so, just like small ways of reconnecting with our places, one of the best ways to do that is just through bird watching, just through paying attention to the songs and the sights of all of the birds around, which are often really important parts of ecosystems that we take for granted. And so I'm just learning the names of birds and the songs of birds that are in my area and in other places when I go visit other places, and making a connection for myself between the birds that are singing. I saw an indigo bunting yesterday for the first time in my life. It was just on my fence, beautiful little blue bird. I'd never seen one before. And the story in the baptism of Jesus, where the Holy Spirit descends and is a dove. God appears in the form of a dove. The Spirit is a dove as a bird. And so we've got all these birds around us, and we've got the Spirit moving and singing.
Yes.
And really opening myself up to that like beautiful mystery that is always within reach. I just didn't know how to pay attention to it, and trying to find how to invite other people into that attention so that we can become more connected and more thoughtful about the ways that we walk on the earth and who we are walking with.
Thank you. Yeah, that was just the way that you express all that, Nathan. I was like, the wonder. that's what immediately came to mind. Just the the wonderment of the world and the environment that surrounds us, and what we choose to engage and what we disengage, but the joy of actually being able to sit and be present with all that is around us. So thank you both, Reverend Wavette and Nathan. This has been a joyous morning personally for me. And I hope it has been enriching to those who are with us. I didn't know if we had any questions, from our audience that we wanted to engage. We have a few moments. Ms. Wynella, do we have any questions?
There aren't any in the chat.
Okay, all right.
A lot of expressions of how wonderful the discussion has been.
Oh, good, yes, kudos. Now, Wavette, one question I do wonder is, did the fruit truck man, where was his succession plan?
Exactly.
Because when you mentioned that, I just thought about the joy of being able to, pass by. It's like,
right.
Ooh, and you knew you were gonna stop by.
That's right.
And because everything was always affordable, and going and smelling and thumping, everything was just glorious. Well, there is be nothing else. Reverend Waved, Nathan, did you have any last words to leave our audience before we get to Miss Anita?
The last thing I would just say is I hope that we would all see a place where we can step into this collective work.
Uh-oh,
She
Reverend
froze.
Waved, you froze. Okay, we're gonna come back to you, Rev, because I know it looks like it's gonna be intense and really good. And it always is. And Nathan?
No, I don't think so. I'm glad to see a bunch of people join together to talk and think about these things. It's not, the work is not too hard. We can do it.
Yes, we can. And thank you. I think many of us need to hear that. And so it matters when and where we enter, how we enter, and and the love that we give to it. And so I'll leave here. Thank you so much, everyone. Enjoy your Saturday. And next we have up Miss Anita Mills. Take care.
Thank you, Candace, for moderating that discussion. I did see a question that came to me about how to get involved in volunteering with the gardens. And I will just suggest that you visit our website, the website of the Dallas Coalition for Hunger Solutions. You can find it at dallashunger.org. And on our website, we have a garden map. We have a garden locator map. And I'm going to mention that again at the end of our event today. Now it's my joy to introduce Anita Mills, who actually is living in Tulsa, Oklahoma. She used to live in Dallas, but because of the miracles of Zoom and the wonders of technology, she can join us this morning for our event. And Anita is a gardener, an activist, a weaver, a mentor, and a singer. She's also a wonder when it comes to spurring people to start community gardens. And so she's going to share her wisdom with us this morning. Thank you so much for joining us, Anita.
Thank you. And I have to figure out how to share the screen. Here we go.
Stop sharing, and then you can share.
Yes. There we go. And slideshow. Well, we'll move along without the slideshow. First off, I wanted to thank the last panel. The land, food, and faith really strike home with me because I am called to feed people and teach people to how to grow food. And I'm also at Phillips Theological Seminary in the Masters of Social Justice. So all that resonated with me. I've gardened all my life. And yes, I've gardened all my life. I've been organic since 1969. Since 2013, I was able to start experimenting with alternative growing systems, chickens, greenhouse, aquaponics. While in Dallas, I mentored 2 nonprofit and community gardens. Got my permaculture design certification in 2015. And for the last 3 years, I have been managing 2 large faith-based nonprofit gardens. One is 800 square feet, expanding to 1,200, and the other one is 2,000 square feet. So food is what I'm all about. We're going to talk about the 10 steps to starting a community garden. And I want to give credit to the American Community Garden Association, who provides guidelines for launching a successful community garden in neighborhoods. And it's available to anybody to go into their website and pull up their guidelines. Now, the thing is, And I tell people, you have to have community before you have a garden. You have to ask, is a garden really needed and wanted? Should it be a vegetable, flower, or both? Should it be organic? Who should be involved? Who is to benefit from the garden? And then go forth and invite people, whether it's tenants in an apartment complex, community organizations, church organizations, anyone you think could be interested, invite them and talk to them and form a planning community or planning committee, which is from the community. I think a great example of having the right people on the planning committee is about 7 or 8 years ago, a large faith-based organization that has a retirement village decided to install a community garden. It's only 2,000 square feet. They put in raised beds, and everyone in the retirement community said, wow, this is wonderful. But they weren't consulted because gravel was put down, rocks were put down between the beds as walkways. It meant that the people with walkers or wheelchairs or with balance problems could not access the garden. So it didn't become a community garden. It became a garden that grew food for the community, food bank. So the original idea went by the wayside. It's a lesson to learn. Another garden at a Christian church here in Tulsa, about 4 or 5 years ago, they put in a wonderful garden, spent $5,000 putting in the garden. The members of the church were just thrilled. And over 4 or 5 years, the participation dropped until when they came to me, nobody was interested in doing the garden. So I said, what is your community? Well, it's an apartment complex, but they aren't interested in gardening. And the surrounding neighborhoods were single family homes and everybody had their own backyard to garden in. So what we did is we reached out to an immigrant community and they came in and were delighted to have a garden. But all this goes to say, when you're planning, you need to get as many people who might be involved as possible, twice as many as you think you need, because you're going to have dropout. From year to year, you're going to have dropout. You also want to get more than one person as a garden coordinator. They should be well organized because you're going to have paperwork, you're going to have people asking questions, you have communications, and they can't do it alone. They have to have committees, which means a large group of people, because you don't want a committee of one that talks about funding and partnerships and youth activities, construction planning, and communication. So one of the things to do in planning is to map your assets in the community. What does that mean? Who are the people that are involved and what are their skills and gifts? What are their talents? What do they know? What associations are in the community? Are they formal or informal? All of these can contribute to garden planning and working the garden. Institutions in the area, whether it's schools or nonprofits or churches, they have resources and you can bring those to bear. Also look at the assets for land. I was just thrilled to hear about the church with 6.5 acres. That is wonderful. That is such a gift to the community. You look at the ecology and the infrastructure of your community, and then look to your local economy. Where can you find donations and support, funding Who can help with your financing and your publicity? These are all community assets that you can link into. And then look at everybody's individual gifts. What are the skills, knowledge, and abilities of the people involved? Are they social or not? This is important. Again, asset mapping. And part of this is doing face-to-face interviews with people in the community. One community organizer in West Dallas went door to door to neighbors in the area that they were going to install a community garden. She talked to people. She asked them what they were interested in. Would they be willing to work in the garden? One thing we run into here in Tulsa is folks say, well, let's put in a community garden in a food desert. And I respond, if you're a single mother with 3 children working 2 jobs, how are you going to work a community garden also? So look at your community, look at the needs of the community, and whether a garden is appropriate. So next thing, you need a sponsor. Okay, is it a church? It is an organization? Are you going to have just a group of community people who come together in membership? One church, and here you want to think creatively, because you don't just need somebody to come in and write a check. That takes all the ownership out of it. The more people are involved in setting up the garden, the more they are engaged, the more they are invested in its success. And if you do run into problems with money, one garden raised money by selling square inches of the garden at $5 each to hundreds of sponsors. Also, the idea is when you have this grand idea and you just want to grow this large, beautiful garden, maybe you need to start small. Start a small garden, have it succeed, have a waiting list for the beds, and then you know you can expand. But don't have a huge garden with half the beds empty. That's discouraging. It's discouraging to the gardeners. It's discouraging to funders. It's discouraging to anybody who comes there and wants to participate. Now you need to know that it has to be accessible. Remember the story of the raised beds and they put in gravel? That was not accessible to people with mobility challenges. Think about this. Also, the site has to have sunshine. And I'll show you a picture in the next slide. I was called into a community garden. They said, we just can't get tomatoes and peppers to grow here. Well, gee, you have a tree shading most of the day. You need 6 to 8 hours a day of sunshine. Also, you need water, or else you need to get very creative about how you're going to water the plants, because when the heat of the summer comes in, you're going to have to water. If it's in an urban area, you need to test for possible pollutants. West Dallas ran into this problem because of the lead smelters that were there. Find out who owns the land. Are they willing to help you? Will they grant you access? Will they lease the land to you? If it's a church, what sort of agreement do you have with the church that covers them on liability? Because there is a problem. If somebody steps on a rake and gets hit in the head and gets a concussion, who pays the hospital bill? These are very real questions that have to be answered. So there's the garden that won't grow tomatoes or peppers. It's beautifully laid out. It just doesn't have sunshine. You could grow greens. You could grow root vegetables here, but you can't grow tomatoes and peppers. Now, when you prepare and develop the site, you need a plan. You need a very detailed plan. What What materials do you need? How are you going to build out the garden? Is it going to be all wooden boards that have to be replaced in 3 to 5 years? Is it going to be concrete blocks? Who's going to clean up the site? Who's going to gather the materials or deliver the materials to the site? What's the design of the garden? Is it workable in terms of access for wheelbarrows, for mowers if you want to mow between the beds? So you have to have a plan. A garden I was recently involved with, a year ago it was proposed, but nothing came of it. But then a plan was developed, a very detailed plan. And within 10 days, everybody jumped on board and said, oh, I can do this, I can do that. They were paralyzed because there was no set plan. There was no written plan, no layout measured and figured with the sun and the water. And building that garden took a team. This is only half the team. This is the construction half of the team, because the church who's associated with the garden said, well, we have money and we have a home improvement ministry team. And guess what? One of the fellows on that team owned an equipment leasing business. There's a resource. He brought his Bobcat, which helped move the 2 pallets of concrete blocks to the site. He helped take the 3 cubic yards of dirt and put it into the beds. He had an excavator that helped level the area for the beds. So it takes a team. And that was what they ended up with. After 3.5 hours, it all came together. Everyone pitched in. And it didn't take very long, and everyone was proud of the work they did. It's now being planted up by the farmer who a year ago said, you need a garden here, but didn't have a plan. So think about it. When you plan and lay things out, people find things that they can do in talents and step forward. So once you have the idea and the plan, how are you going to make the plots? How are you going to assign them? How many plots are going to be available? Do you have space for tools? Are you making compost? And how are you educating people about making compost? Where is it? It's up in the mid-cities. There's a community garden that's run by the city, and they have signs on everything. This is how you do compost. They also have a leaf corral for all those leaves that people bag up and leave on the sidewalk for us to pick up. Those leaves are wonderful, wonderful fertilizer and mulch. But again, people have to know how to use it and what to do. Are you going to plant flowers and shrubs around the garden? Or maybe encourage people to plant things like marigolds and basil and zinnias in their garden beds, because these attract pollinators and they also make it beautiful. It helps promote goodwill with the neighbors and passersby and municipal authorities who don't really know about what a garden can look like. So here's the entrance to a garden that I visited, I believe in Columbus, Ohio. And right outside the fence were all these beautiful flowers and herbs. Do you think they had pollinators in their garden? I think so. Also children. Women with children mothers like to get their children involved in the garden. Maybe you want to have a special garden set aside just for kids. Maybe it's I'm planning a sensory garden in an old kiddie wading pool at one garden I'm at, because it's next to a residence where women who are underemployed and no place else to live They live with their up to 2 children. They come out on the weekends and they experience the garden. So the wading pool came my way, and I'm filling it with potting soil, and I'm going to be making a sensory garden. It's going to stimulate scent as well as sight, and maybe textures too. We're going to have zinnias and marigolds, and I might just plant some green beans for the kids to pick. But children are involved in growing, and they love planting seeds. If you've ever told a young volunteer to plant a carrot seed, and you know how small carrot seeds are, every 2 inches, they will plant 1 seed every 2 inches, whereas we might just scatter them. They are very precise, they are very interested, and if you've had them plant a bean, they'll come back every day to see that it sprouts. And they also love the experience of harvesting and eating. Here's a picture of my 2.5-year-old grandson picking and eating cherry tomatoes. He loved it. He thought this was the greatest thing in the world. He just kept searching and searching and searching to find the next cherry tomato. So don't forget, kids. It also allows that single mother with 3 children to bring her children to the garden, and it provides them something to do. Next, in ways of organizing, the fun part, determining rules, because you want people to observe rules. You don't want someone coming in and spraying Roundup in your organic garden. You want to clarify what the philosophy of growing is. And people are more willing to comply with rules when they've had a hand in creating them. It goes back to having people engaged in planning, because then they're invested and they will go along with those ground rules. What happens if someone lets their plot go? They don't harvest, they don't weed, pass time to clean out the summer dead trash. You haven't seen them in maybe 6 weeks. What are you going to do? You have to have rules. One garden in it was just east of downtown. They have a row monitor. Every garden bed, or row of beds, has a monitor. So the garden coordinator doesn't have to do everything. The row monitor helps mentor gardeners, particularly new ones, helps them find resources, and also nudges them. If they haven't seen them in a while, they follow up with them. What's happening? Do you need help with your plot? Or maybe the person has moved. So that's what row monitors do, and it's a great way to distribute the work of maintaining a garden. And then once you have that, how do you keep the community? Because once all the committee meetings are over, then it's just individual gardeners coming to work. How do you keep in contact? Do you have an email list, a Facebook group, a telephone tree? That goes back a ways. Do you have a bulletin board, a rainproof bulletin board to announce certain things like events? Have regular celebrations and share food. A potluck. It brings people together and forms that community that strengthens the garden and makes it succeed. One local garden here regularly posts on Facebook when they have work days and invites people to come, and people sign up on Facebook and says, oh, I'd love to be there with you, or tell me when you're going to be there. I'll be there. It's a great communication tool. Those are the 10 steps. I've added one more. And I call it planning for sustainability. Many times the garden management devolves on one person, and that person wears out. You have to have a committee of managers. One recent person who has done an outstanding job keeping a garden going decided to step aside, and she had trouble finding another person. She has found one person. She needs 3 or 4 people to manage the garden, which has a food forest involved with it. And again, plan for sustainability, because the first and second years are everyone is high with enthusiasm. But what happens when these people fade away? They get burned out, they change jobs, they move. What are you going to do in the 4th and 5th year? Where can you get more people to come in? How can you recruit? Because recruitment isn't a one-time thing. Recruitment is ongoing. You want to keep a waiting list and keep events and celebrations going. That brings the community together and reignites energy and enthusiasm. It also brings other people of the community in to say, oh, what's happening here? And you can say, oh, yes, we'd like you to help us plant this, maybe this public bed where the food goes to the community rather than just to a person. What it is involve as many people as possible in running the garden. Don't turn away any volunteers. Anyone who asks to help should be given a task, whether it's, would you turn on the water? Would you help me move the hose? Would you help me plant these 5 tomato plants? Once they start getting involved, then their enthusiasm grows, and they're the ones who will become more engaged and stay with you for the longer term. So those are my final thoughts. And I'm going to stop sharing, if I can do that, and take questions. Farmers Branch, yes, it was Farmers Branch Community Garden. And yes, I'd be glad to share the slides. Any other
I was going
questions?
to say that I can send out a link. I can send out a link to the slides. I have them. I'm sorry I couldn't get them. I couldn't locate them in my folders in time to pull them up on my screen, Anita. But I have your slides, and I'll share them.
Okay, great.
Yeah,
That's wonderful. Thank you. And I want to see.
Are there any questions for Anita?
Well,
I'm
I do
sorry.
want to say one thing. I want to see a garden in every church in Tulsa. And one garden that I'm working with, they have 2.5 acres that they're paying to mow that they're not going to build on. I have designs on that, and I've turned in a proposal. They need to have a farm. So yes, Candace. Oh, that was not a hand. Thank you.
No, I was clapping and I was saying, I said, I need to talk with Anita. So I'm planning a trip to Tulsa.
Oh, good.
Yeah.
I'll take you to my gardens.
I want that very much. Thank you.
Thank you. And Wyanella can give you all my contact information.
Yes, yes. I'm so
Thank you.
glad that we could still benefit from your knowledge and expertise as a result of this pandemic. What a wonderful side effect.
Well, and one thing I'm learning, a garden is one thing, but when you're a market garden and growing for high volume, high yield, it's a different mindset. So I'm taking a market farming course this spring that's taught by Green Country Permaculture here in Tulsa. and it's certainly opening up my mind, and then I'll know what to do with that 2.5 acres. So I will yield to Susie. Wonderful Susie.
Yes, thank you again, Anita. And so now it's time for us to hear from our fearless leader and one half of the urban agriculture dynamic duo, Susie Marshall. Is the executive director, founder and executive director of Grow North Texas. She is a food system activist, a food equity advocate, and those of us who know her well knows that she has a servant heart. And so Susie, I'm gonna turn it over to you.
Okay. Thank you, Wyanella. And thank you to Anita and Candace and Reverend Wyvette and Nathan for the fantastic discussion. I think, as Candace insinuated, that we could have had that discussion for a long time with that group, and I'm sure others would have joined in. I want to move us into a time now that we've talked about kind of, maybe gotten us thinking about why we think this food issue is important to ourselves within our own context. And Anita's talked about what it means to have a community garden. I want to talk a little bit, and we're going to have a discussion, so be prepared. We're going to have a discussion about what you all would love to see in Dallas County food system and in agriculture and food access. There's lots of ideas around. There are lots of possibilities. If you look around the country, we're actually behind what is happening in local food systems and other places in the country. And that actually, it's a benefit in the fact that we can look and see what else is being done and adapt that to Dallas. But as also has been alluded to previously, it's important that the community that will be affected is engaged in the discussion of the solutions. And you may or may not be somebody who doesn't have enough food access, but maybe you are, maybe you work with a community that is. And so I want to kind of guide us through a discussion. These are the questions we're going to talk about. What are the values of a food system? And so when I talk about a food system, I mean everything from planting the seed to cultivating that crop, to harvesting, to getting it to people who will eat it, whatever way that happens, to preparing it, and then dealing with any waste that's left. And it kind of goes in a circle, because your waste should go back into the composting and back into the soil to start the process again. That's the ideal food system. So what are the values that are important? Is it important to, well, let me approach this differently. Right now, we have a conventional food system that values efficiency. It values profit over people and planet. It values large scale, and it values, there was another word there that I now can't recall. Those are those values. And I always talk about, we have an industrial food system up here that's humming along. And what we're talking about building is something that comes underneath it and recreates what we used to have in our world, where we had grocery stores, we had farms, we had all points of access. We had the guy on the road, on the side of the road, that was always there with his wonderful fruits and vegetables. And so we're talking about that stuff that comes up from the community in our local places that is very place-based. What are the values for that system that comes out of our community? And then in terms of growing food in our area, what does that look like now? And what could it look like? What do you think are possibilities out there? And then on the food access side, maybe how that local production plays into being able to provide better food access, but what are the other opportunities beyond? And I want to add another qualifier in that sentence of what are opportunities beyond the grocery store? What are opportunities beyond a corporate grocery store? And yes, currently our food system values fast food. It's quick and it's cheap. So those are the questions they, Ms. Wildnella has posted those in the chat as well. And can we go? Yeah, exactly. You read my mind, Wildnella, going back to a gallery view. Anybody want to jump in? Want to be the first to jump in to talk about values? Or any of it?
I'd like to say, can you hear me?
Mhm.
Okay, I'd like to say that our team is up here is saying food is a right. Access to healthy food is a right for everyone. And that's where we're coming from.
Thank you, Anita. Others have thoughts about values?
Yes, this is Candace. When you proposed that question, Susie, I got to thinking about the conversation that we were having, this conversation that I get the honor of being engaging in community, and in regards to those values, you know, it is fellowship, it is the stewardship, it is the honoring, you know, honoring of our ancestors, honoring all of creation. You know, honoring the memories that you know, that food holds, because food is a beautiful convener, you know, across differences, you know, but also, I mean, you know, and when you think about like the place, you know, like you can think of a certain place, even, you know, like in the US, you know, there are certain places that you know you're gonna get some really good food. And I remember earlier in the week, Reverend Y had on her Facebook talk about, you know, salmon croquettes. And that I was so happy. I was like, oh my gosh, my mouth started watering. But I mean, but also, you know, you think of the value of time, and it seems as though we don't, like, you know, and going back to even touching base on what Ms. Wynella said about, you know, what we value, you know, fast food, but, you know, but it's like fast, like in our time, everything is fast. It's, you know, we have sped up our lives so much that we don't even live them. And so I think that, you know, those are the, and equity, you know, that those are the values that come up for me.
So I heard you say some fantastic things. So I'm going to reflect the words that I heard back to you. So fellowship and stewardship, coming together around food and caring for the land and the resources that we have, and honoring not only the land, but the memories and the history of our own tradition. These are my words, honoring the history of our own traditions, positive and negative, and the struggles and celebrations that that are embedded there. You didn't, I don't think you said place-based, but you did speak about place. And so oftentimes a food system is place-based, and that means that it's appropriate for that place. It may not be appropriate for someplace else. It might not, one neighborhood may have something that works for their neighborhood. It might not work over here. Correct. On the other side.
Mm-hmm.
And then time and equity, time and in appreciating and honoring time.
But also, you know, I mentioned, you know, honoring our ancestors as well.
Yes, yes, yes. Others?
Well, I certainly echo what has been said and what Anita said at the beginning about food being a basic, you know, Maslow's pyramid, right? You know, basic need. I mean, in order to survive. And but it shouldn't be that only some people have food to survive while others have food to help them thrive. You know, it seems like all of us, when you're talking about humanity, food should be serving all of us equally or equitably. But you know, that's what makes me, I just think about survival versus thriving. You know, that food is needed for both. And who should decide whether someone just merely survives or is able to also thrive as resulting from the food system?
Yes, thank you. I want to make sure everybody sees Reverend Wyvette's comment that food is the currency in God's economy. And that is so true. The way we come together and all the things that food and eating and communing together represents is pretty amazing. Vanessa says, in this conversation and others, I think a common thread is a disconnect between people and their food and a disconnect in nature in general. Vanessa, do you want to say anything more about that? Do you have other thoughts? Oh, Wynella, can you unmute? Can you let folks unmute themselves?
Okay, I'm trying to figure out, how do I do that? Unmute participants.
Let's see. Let's see. Can we do it? There we go. I just went over to the participant list.
Okay, and just said unmute everybody. Right? Okay. Well, Vanessa.
Oh yeah. Yes,
Okay.
I'm Vanessa. Most of y'all probably know me. I work for the Dallas Public Library. I'm part of the Seed Library team there. But yeah, I think people don't appreciate food necessarily because they don't understand the process in growing it. It's going back to that fast, and people want their instant gratification. But I think, yeah, like Candace said, when you slow down and when you're growing your own food or when you're involved in the growing process, I think you appreciate where it comes from a lot more. And Anita's point of getting kids involved, like when I know my nieces, when they started growing their own food, they ate their vegetables much better than when they were not. You know, it's that ownership component that we keep talking about. You know, so the kids have ownership of that food, and so they're more likely to eat it. So yeah, I think it's just, you know, getting people outside more too, which I think, you know, is one of been the few benefits of the pandemic the past year, is that because outdoors is a safer space, that more people are getting outdoors. And I know we've seen the number of people trying to garden skyrocket too. So I think it's been one of the few good things, is I think it's slowed down people a little bit and giving them a little bit more time to appreciate nature.
Thank you, Vanessa. Yeah, I think this last year has shifted some thinking in certain people.
I wanted to add that another value is health, because not only when we grow food, we have better physical health and less disease. Growing food gets people active, and also mental health. That's an important component of getting the hands in the dirt and working and growing food.
Well, and I'll add on to that, growing food that isn't tainted, right? Soil, water, you know, food that's been covered in pesticides and that sort of thing. You know, that's a value, right? That's important to me. Untainted food. And not necessarily organic. I mean, I certainly I value that, but everybody can't afford organic food, but knowing where your food comes from, locally sourced food, and practices, you know, the standard practices, accepted practices for growing food that's good to consume, that's not going to harm us, you know, greatly, right? Having access to that kind of food for everybody.
Another add-on to the value of dignity was when I was working with Amanda in West Dallas, teaching the WIC mothers to grow vegetables and herbs. Just the fact that they could grow some of their own food and not depend upon someone to give it to them just had a tremendous impact on their self-worth, on their dignity. And I saw it again at City Square when there was a fellow who wanted, or several people really, who wanted to grow something back at their cottage. And Tyrone and I made sure that they had seeds and soil and whatever they needed, because it was independence and it was dignity. And that is so powerful. That's why I want to teach people how to grow food.
Yes, the value of dignity is really, it's really important. Something that sits with me on a regular basis. Okay, what about food growing? We have lots of really cool projects that are bubbling up and flourishing and starting and coming along. So are there thoughts that you have about what it's like what is food growing like in our area now? Are there opportunities and barriers? And then kind of along with that, what do you wish we had? And so just all of those things together. What are your thoughts? What's your dream? And please let us know if we need to unmute you. Or maybe we just unmute everybody for a minute, ask everybody to unmute so they can.
I'm trying to figure it out. Let me know if you need to be unmuted.
It seems like we have lots of interest, lots of opportunities. I know that I'm going to say something so y'all have time to think and maybe ask to be unmuted if you need to. Reverend Wybett, you should.
Okay.
Okay.
Yeah. Thank you.
Did you have a thought you wanted to share?
Yeah, I did, but I don't want to interrupt you.
No, go ahead, because I can't remember exactly what I was going to say.
Okay. Okay. Well, I was going to say in terms of, what do we envision, or what do I envision? I know, like at the mustard seed garden at First Christian, one of the things that we wanted to make sure is that we gave people the option of what they wanted to plant. So it wasn't that we were saying to them, like, these are the only things that you're going to be able to plant out here. It's like, no, we're giving people the option of what they want. And I think that just makes it more rich and more robust, because back to that sense of having ownership and feeling a sense of pride about it and wanting to come out and be engaged in what's happening, I think is really good. And I think another thing that I want to see is one of the things that we're striving for, and that is to have these monthly community garden days where we bring people together from the community to come out and to be a part of what we're doing. So regardless of if they've rented one of the 12x8 raised bed plots or not, they still have an opportunity to come out and participate. and to help steward. And the term that I want to borrow from Ples Montgomery is to be garden guardians, so that they feel like, because this is a community garden, that they can come out and have a hand in making sure that it's, tilled, making sure that it's watered, and just the basic upkeep of it.
That again, that participation and the ownership, or that sense of community that comes with all that is fantastic. Others who'd like to talk about what you'd like to see or do see and are frustrated by? It's okay to talk about frustrations or what you see as barriers.
Well, I'll just add some of the city rules and regulations are barriers to growing food in Dallas. What it costs to, if you don't already have water on your land, or there could be a piece of land, but if it doesn't already have water access, then it's a costly process to turn on that water.
Yes, it is. Well, it's what we've learned over there's a group of us that have been meeting during the pandemic. Really, we started last year as a way to just kind of do something together when we couldn't get together. But that has led us into kind of looking at some of the ordinances and some of the challenges. And it's about, for a water meter that's big enough to really to water a sizable garden, you could get a smaller one, but it's anywhere from $4,800 to $6,000 to get the right size water meter. Now, if there was a house there was a meter there at one time, it's only a couple $100s to reinstall a meter on the stub that's there. But we can't get them to budge on some of those prices. I've talked to people. I've talked to the head of the water department about some of that. And so hopefully in a lot of urban spaces where people want to grow, there will have been a house, there will have been a building that had a water meter. And so there will be opportunities for just the installation of the meter, which is a much lower barrier. We'll just have to figure out as we go forward, figuring out how to provide support for groups that are needing to put in an actual meter on a location.
As I recall, when I ran the traps for our how to get started, one of the issues that arose, not only the cost of the water meter, was finding a plumber who is bonded with the city of Dallas. So that's another barrier. And then, if I remember correctly, Owenwood ran into an issue of platting.
That is an issue. Then we realized we had an irrigation meter that we didn't know about. So we've had water since then. But yes, actually we investigated the plat map issue as well in the past year, and figured out that it's actually even a step back in the process. There's a set of things there's a set of conditions that makes a piece of property a buildable piece of property. And I can't tell you why that's a necessity, but that's a step that you have to go through. And so actually we were encouraged to work on the policy fix for it is to add an additional situation in which a land can be considered a buildable piece of property without a plat map. And that is if it's going to be used for food production, in-ground food production, where there's no structures, no permanent, what the city would consider a permanent structure. That doesn't eliminate the opportunity for sheds and things like that. But if you're not going to put a house or an office building on it, then you don't need certain things to happen. So that's a policy piece that is possible to get changed.
Susie, also code can be a challenge for urban gardeners. You know, sometimes urban gardeners are cited because they're growing something and code thinks it's weeds or whatever. So in our current growing food now, I know that there have been folks who run up against the city of Dallas codes in trying to grow food at their homes or on a piece of property.
Yes, because if you're using good gardening practices and you've got a cover crop that you're letting go to seed, or you've got your whatever has bolted, it's shot up the little flowers and you're letting it go to seed, or you're letting things dry out for some reason, or the weather and your life has not allowed you to get everything cut back. It can look like it's just untended. It can not look very pretty at certain times because that's part of the growing cycle. And so, yes, there's some education for code. I think there's also a need for the city to have a designation for pollinator areas. On our Owenwood Farm project, it's actually about 1/10 of an acre that has been seeded in just pollinator plants. And right now we have a lot of the Maximilian sunflowers, they send up multiple flowers. They're real small sunflowers, has multiple heads, but they have these great leaf structures. It also has, I think, some sorghum grass or something like that in it. So right now it's beautiful green, but it's getting up. It's probably 18 to 24 inches tall, which is too tall for code, but we're not going to mow it. We will mow the grass that's there, but we're not going to mow that. And then we're going to mark all our milkweed with milkweed that's naturally coming up on this piece of property. And if you aren't familiar, milkweed is the place that monarch butterflies lay their eggs, and then the babies hatch and they feed there, and then they go on their journey, whichever direction they go. I think they go north. So there are some barriers. There's some definitely recognized barriers. I'm interested if others have, visions for what could possibly happen if you have big dreams for food production in the city.
Well, my dream is to have a garden at every library that has space for it, but there's a lot of things that would have to happen to make that work. I mean, the good thing is most libraries have irrigation systems already, right? So,
right.
But they've had gardens before that have not been successful because some of the things that Anita talked about, the people that ran them left, or there's a lot of different same things you run into a community garden, you can run into a garden in a public building. So, but it's always one of my dreams. I also want to have a culinary literacy center at libraries too, where people can learn how to cook things, because if you can grow things but you don't know how to eat them, I think we've lost a lot of knowledge about how to prepare food, again because of the instantaneousness. We like our food to be pre-prepared and all that stuff. I think the Free Library of Philadelphia has a culinary literacy program, which I think is something that we need. And I know some of the rec centers have, I think the Juanita Crafts Rec Center has a cooking program there, or did pre-pandemic. So yeah, I think it's just not just the growing it, but also how the nutrition aspect and the how to prepare it that we need to work on too.
Thank you, Vanessa. So if we have gardens at all the churches and we have gardens at all the libraries, where else? Schools? There's some school gardens popping up.
Health clinics like Blewett Flowers. Hatcher Station, Hatcher Clinic is over by the Dart Hatcher Station, and Restorative Farms does have a training community garden across the street from the Hatcher Clinic. Wouldn't it be great if the healthcare providers at the Hatcher Clinic, which is a Parkland satellite clinic, could prescribe vegetables, right? Yes. Fruits and vegetables, that
Yes.
the Hatcher garden, the Hatcher training farm would fulfill, right?
Yes.
I know Baylor Scott and White, I know Health and Wellness Center has been doing something around that for years, but
Correct.
so now we've got another opportunity between this Hatcher clinic and Hatcher training farm. So, and there are probably some, and then Blewett Flowers is over here in Oak Cliff. What's over here in Plus Montgomery, Mustard Seed Garden, and all these gardens, Singing Hills Garden, all these gardens over here in Oak Cliff that Plus Montgomery is personally the Johnny Appleseed for. He's like Johnny Appleseed, right? Have a relationship between Blewett Flowers Clinic and these gardens where people can go. And you're talking about subsidizing and resources to help make that happen. Candace, why don't you tell us a little bit about how the Baylor Scott and White prescription program has worked in the past? I don't know if you're still doing it, but how does that work?
All right. Yes, in the past, we had the, we didn't call it green prescriptions, but it is basically green prescriptions. We had a grant that afforded us to be able to write a prescription for everyone. I think we had $60 to use. You could use like $15 to $20 each visit that you would come to the farm stand, where we provide fresh produce. I would say it's pretty much like at cost, but it's a reduced cost, especially if you are in an area, a food apartheid area. And it proved to be successful. It helped, to moderate people's health outcomes, like the numbers with their A1C, which is your glucose levels over a course of 3 months. Also, like with blood pressure. And then we also, coupled it with all of our, our cooking classes and our wellness. We don't call it, our physical activity classes. We don't call it exercise classes, but it proved to be beneficial. And it's a concept that was created years ago, but it does work. But there's just not enough funding around that. But because you do need the funding to be able to, certainly if you want to have a long-term impact and sustainable impact in communities.
We have a program that just started in North Tulsa, which is like South Dallas, at a faith-based clinic. And we raised $180,000 for this program for up to 50 people who are 55 plus with uncontrolled diabetes. And what we are doing is prescribing 2 boxes of fresh vegetables and fruits with some curating to allow for preferences, individual preferences, every 2 weeks for a year. And they have to attend 1 cooking or nutrition class a month. And then we're tracking the metrics. And our advisory committee already includes nutritionists from various hospitals, clinics, and our idea is within 5 years to take it citywide and look for, we think insurance companies will come in and finance this, because a study, I can't remember, I'd have to pull it up, a couple of years ago estimated the cost savings in healthcare expenses was $100 billion. And that's significant. With that, we can go to insurance companies to underwrite a sliding scale for fresh vegetables from local farmers.
I think hospital systems are the other source of that funding. They're with the ACA, they're required to do a certain amount of community work. And
we have community benefit funds.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
And there actually was a study at Parkland in Pleasant Grove that worked with a few families and showed that, yes, they would save millions and millions of dollars just by supporting, it was less expensive to support the produce than pay for the healthcare.
Yeah.
So in this, let's switch to talking even more about food access. We've talked about the veggie prescription concepts, which I think are fantastic. And we have an issue. I'm going to insert my own thoughts right now, and y'all can agree or disagree. Right now, in our world, we know that the root cause of hunger is poverty. We know there are issues around why people are in poverty, and one of those is wages. And so we have a problem with food access and affordability in various ways, and even more so if you're talking about smaller scale production, if there can be higher costs with smaller scale production that potentially could be overcome. It's one way to look at it is, do you support the farm producing, or do you support the cost, how do you support the cost of the foods? But until we may have to look at ways to subsidize the food access until wages come up, until we do the work to get and the political will is there to change the wages. I'm going to apologize for my cat if you can hear him in the background every once in a while. He's decided he needs something from me. So I think we should think about, like, what are the possibilities, and then figure out how to make it all work out, make the dollars work so that everybody gets the dollars that they need and the food that they need. Any creative solutions or things you think ought to happen? Did y'all see the Cornerstone Baptist, the store that Cornerstone Baptist store just recently opened?
Well, it hasn't opened yet, has it? But
oh, maybe it hasn't opened yet.
Yeah,
My apologies.
Cornerstone Baptist Church on Martin Luther King Drive in South Dallas has gotten some development fund money to start a grocery store, or it's a project, a grocery store project. And
I was really disappointed to see the comment from the professor at SMU in the article that was in the paper saying that, well, that's fine if you're putting, a central market somewhere, or whatever he said. This is not a solution to food access. Well, no, wait a minute.
Mm-hmm.
Is it not actually a solution?
Well,
Right.
and Susie, that reminds me of the comment that always comes up about urban farms, about how urban farms aren't the solution, or they're not sustainable. But right now, Owenwood has an urban farm. Well, Bonton was one of the first. So, they're kind of
Paul Quinn was actually before Bonton.
Paul Quinn, Bonton, Owenwood, the downtown Farmers Assisting Retired Military Farm. Elmwood Farm is just blowing up over here in Oak Cliff, in north central Oak Cliff. That's five that I can call right now are farming.
4 of them are supported by organizations, or so there is an economic, and I keep talking about this, so it must be that I need to stop and really work on this issue of if we want people to farm and be able to make some income, what is it we're asking them to put into that? What can they expect to get out of it? What's that financial model? But I guess that's what I'm saying is, or what I'm wanting to kind of pull out of everybody is that there's not one solution. Mm-hmm. It's not just the store that Cornerstone does. It's not just the small farms. It's not just one corporate grocery store. What are the other kinds of solutions that could happen?
Well, mobile markets, right? Anita, tell us about the mobile market in Tulsa.
Yeah.
Well, it started out about 6 years ago in a converted 6-horse trailer. And they now have a new semi-sized trailer. They hit 18 low-income or housing projects a week with a curated, how can I put it? They have everything in the store, all the paper goods, the packaged goods, freezer, refrigerator, and fresh produce. They take SNAP and also what we call double up bucks, which matches SNAP dollars for produce. And they've also created a micro grocery store in a public housing, senior housing project, which is 200 square feet. And it's run by volunteers there in the project. And they're now talking to the Tulsa Housing Authority for when they redo a certain housing project, that there will be space for the micro grocery store. And the latest concept is to take like a 20-foot container and make a grocery store out of that and put it on site. So it makes access available. Also, the Housing Authority is looking at a farm in their a garden and a farm for their replat when they rebuild. So that will be a teaching opportunity. So some things are happening. I love the micro grocery store because it's right there. It's available whenever residents need it.
And
if
and
they
you're talking
can't,
about excuse me.
Yeah,
You're
well,
talking about a shipping container, one of those
a shipping container made into a grocery store. And you open it at certain hours and it's run by volunteers, just like the micro store at the housing project.
If I'm not mistaken, the micro store, the 200 square foot store is, the folks are compensated in store credit. So they're
Yes.
essentially, it's a work share kind
Yeah.
of program where people receive food dollars in exchange for their equitable time, equitable food dollars in exchange for their time.
And,
Yes, and Vanessa, it is Tulsa Real Good Food.
and so who are the suppliers? So are we talking about are there enough local farmers to supply these grocery stores? How are they supplied? The mobile
Okay.
market, the micro grocery store?
For the produce, Katie has her own farm. She has relationships with other farmers in the area and is now building a coalition of local farmers. She will have storage capacity for a food hub. And but she was going nuts trying to grow most of the food herself. She now has a farming assistant.
And she's buying, because I talked with her in September, which I think this is interesting. She's buying the other food items, the grocery items through Aldi, through an Aldi store. So she places an order at Aldi, and then that actually ups the Aldi store sales. So it helps them as well. And then the brand names that they can get, even this Aldi store brands, are people in that community or those communities that they're in feel that is, the kind of food, the brands that they want. It's not Walmart brand. It's not, Family Dollar. So for them, that is a great option. I think that is actually one of the things to solve for is that access to canned goods, to frozen goods, to things like that. And at prices that can be, because if you just go an individual store, small store tries to get those things from a distributor, you're either not gonna be able to do it or you're gonna have a higher price because you're buying such a small volume. But if we could have a collective buying group that went together and shared that buying and then a distribution system, I think you could make it, I think you could have, a grocery hub that served a whole bunch of smaller stores.
I think you could too. And I'm going to lean in and say that's where I think the churches could really come in. Even where I am on Hampton Road, there are 7 churches within walking distance. And I think what you just said, the sense of coming together collectively, what that can look like if there were partnerships and if people came together and realized and recognized that yes, we may have some differences in, ministries that we do, doctrine and all of that. But at the end of the day, what we have in common is a need to serve the community. And I think, even when we think about the churches that have commercial kitchens that are going unused during the weeks, during the weekdays, what are some ways in which that commercial kitchen could become a place where persons could come in, Anita, to what you were saying, and could prepare meals? That could be a place where people could come, and the cooking classes could happen at the church, and people could come there. They'd have access to fresh made food. I'm not a fan of the food pantry per se, of just this thing stocked with canned goods where people come and somebody hands you what they think that you ought to have. But I'm more of, let's have something, again, back to dignity, where people can come and access what it is that they need. And so I'm going to always lean in and say that this is where the church can get involved. This is where partnerships with the school districts. You've got some of these high schools that have these culinary programs. I know Kimball High School has a culinary program. It's really, you've got all these different entities that are operating in silos, but how do you bring them together and start talking about what are the things that we can do collectively that can ensure that we have a grocery hub in every community? Because the other barrier there, of course, is if there's a store, let's say I'm here at the Hampton Wheatland, but if my nearest store is all the way at Ledbetter, and you've got a person who doesn't have transportation, then there's no way for them to get there. So we've got to start looking at thinking within that 1 mile radius of how do you get something there for those residents that they have access to.
I want to insert real quick, because I know we're running out of time, is Pleza's mother, Betty, several years ago started what she called the veggie store. And one Saturday a month, she would be in front of the church with a table of food, and it was pay what you can, take what you need. That has expanded. Her daughter, Kat, and her husband, Mike, started the same thing out on, wherever, in South Dallas. And that church has now installed a community garden to grow food for the veggie store. And I love that concept because it's dignity. Pay what you can, take what you need. And it's fresh produce.
Absolutely.
It's fantastic. I am responding to Nicole's mention in the chat. She's actually a public health graduate student in New York City, is working on some food insecurity in the Bronx with a church. And would anyone be willing to share their contact info? So I'm sharing mine, and you are all welcome to get in touch. I'm sure others, I feel sure that others of you will share that contact information for her.
And yes, and Nicole, you'll get a follow-up email. You'll get an email following this event with some links and some contact information. Certainly mine will be there, and feel free to reach out to me. And check out our website, dallashunger.org. So I think, Susie, do you have something to get you started in terms of looking at our food system and how we might move it forward? I know you're doing some work in the background on trying to help move Dallas forward in this regard.
Trying. Yes, actually, this has been very helpful, and I really appreciate those of you who've shared your sharing, and I will probably be circling back with you about some things. So I really appreciate everybody being here. It's always fun to talk. And again, I'm sure we could continue to talk about the issues and the struggles and all that kind of stuff. And Juanella, I'm going to turn it back to you.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Susie. I just want to share a few resources here before you leave. On our website, you will find 2 guides that our Urban Agriculture Action Team actually published a few years ago. A network of gardeners who had tried and learned and tried again came together and put what they learned into these guides. And several of us were involved in pulling them together. We're in the process of looking at updating the one on harvesting and selling. But if you go to our website, dallashunger.org, and go to the Urban Agriculture Action Team page, you'll find these resources: a guide to getting started, urban agriculture in Dallas. And while it's Dallas focused, a lot of what's in there is not uncommon for what other cities and municipalities, for what's going on in other cities and municipalities. There are a lot of commonalities. So it might be a good place to start. And harvesting and selling, a guide for new small urban producers. We're in the process of updating this guide probably in the fall. We're looking at coming together again because there have been some changes. And so we're looking at bringing that guide up to date. And then I also want to make you aware of our garden locator map. I mentioned it earlier in the event. If you go to dallashunger.org, go to our website, you can find an urban garden locator. And for those of you who are interested in volunteering at gardens, or perhaps you eat a lot of fruits and vegetables and you want to donate your scraps for compost, there are gardens that can use your coffee ground. And look up a garden near you. You can put in a zip code, you can put in the type of garden, a community garden or a school garden or an urban farm. There's several filters there. And find a garden near you to support. Gardens, they can also use donations, financial and in-kind donations. A number of these gardens donate to food pantries. They donate to organizations that provide food relief. And so you might want to get involved in that. Perhaps you like to cook and you want to offer your culinary skills, piggybacking on what Reverend Y. Vet had to say. Perhaps you want to form a partnership with the garden and offer cooking classes on how to use fresh produce and incorporate fresh ingredients into recipes. So there are all kinds of opportunities that can flow from urban gardens. And so our urban garden locator map is where you can start. Let me see what else have to say here. Okay, what's next? We're in the process of conducting our annual garden project survey. I have like 180 gardens in my database. I've been collecting data on gardens since 2016. And every year I reach out, our coalition reaches out to garden projects to find out if you're still out there, if you're growing, if you plan to grow, what are you growing, how are you growing, who's involved. And so we ask you to let us know that information, because that's information we can share with potential funders and potential supporters. We can demonstrate that there's a need to support community gardens and urban garden projects and urban agriculture projects in Dallas County. This is a Dallas County-wide survey. So if you're out there and if you've heard from me and you haven't responded, please respond to our urban garden project survey, because we're about to launch our first micro grant garden application process. June 1st, we have a little money, and we know that there are gardens out there that are holding on, and as well as some others that would like to emerge but need a little capital infusion. Maybe you need materials to build raised beds, or to sustain what you've already got going. Seeds, water, maybe to pay a water bill, maybe to install a water meter. We might be able to help with that. Classes, El Centro College has an urban agriculture program, and they offer classes to folks who want to learn how to grow food and they have a horticulture program. But perhaps you'd like to take a course, and the course costs a couple of $100. Well, we might be able to help with that. So if you respond to our garden project survey, you'll get information about the garden grant application process. I'm also going to send out an evaluation to those of you who joined us today, so we can get some idea of whether this information was helpful today and what might be helpful to you in the future. I want to thank you for joining us today. Thank you, Urban Agriculture Action Team, Susie Marshall and Candace Thompson, I'm so sorry. Candace Thompson, co-chairs. Thank you, Anita Mills. Thank you, Reverend Rivette, Blair Lavallee. Thank you, Nathan Doris. Thank you for such a wonderful discussion and for teaching us so much. Thank you to those of you who joined us. Thank you for your participation. And we hope to see you again soon.
No.
And thank you.
Okay.
Thank
We'll
you,
get together.
everyone,
Thank
especially
you.
our presenters.
Yes. And Candace
you.
and Susie, I hope to see you Tuesday at 4 o'clock. We're going to talk about our mini. We're getting ready to launch this mini grant. We're getting closer. Thank
Yes,
you.
Yes.
we'll be there.
Thank
Yes,
you.
or be there or be square.
Okay. Thank you so
Y'all
much.
have a
Bye.
beautiful weekend. Happy Mother's Day, everyone.
Thank you.
Yes,
Mother's Day.
yes.
Let me close this out here. Okay.
Great job. Great job, Wynella.
Thank you. Do you want to, can you hang on for 2 minutes?
I'll give you 2 minutes.
Okay. And Anita's welcome, and Reverend, you're welcome too. Maybe we can brief quickly.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, so.
You gonna stop the recording or you gonna keep recording?
Stop the recording.
All
Okay.
right.